I'm Lillian Minix. I'm a communications manager for Timmons Group. I'm going to be the moderator for our webinar today. We've got some great guys on the call, Lowell with Timmons Group and Kirk with Timmons Group as well, Keith with NASF and Craig with UL Research Institutes. We're very excited about this conversation. We're going to have a great time. Just a quick heads up to everyone that we are going to do a Q&A towards the end of the webinar. We're looking at about 40 minutes of content, so we'll save that last 20 minutes for Q&A. And please make sure that you're sticking those questions in the chat or using the Q&A function, and we will get to them closer to the end of the webinar. In the meantime, I'm going to do a super quick round robin, let everybody introduce themselves, and I'm going to kick that off by introducing myself. Pardon me. So like I said, I'm Lillian. I'm the communications manager for Timmons. We are an ENR top 125 firm. We have a fantastic number of services that we offer, but we're here today to talk with this group of guys because we've got some services out of our geospatial solutions division. That team over there, 200 individuals strong, has been doing some really cool things over the years to support folks like Keith and Craig with their endeavors across the U.S. in wildfire solutions. So that's what we're here to talk about today. We are going to kick it off with a discussion about NERIS, which was actually just listed as one of Pop Science's top 50 innovations of 2025. It's absolutely huge news. So we're really excited to be talking about that project today. And now I'm going to throw it over to Lowell. Before you get started, Lowell, just a reminder for the couple of extra folks that just hopped on the call, we're going to do a Q&A towards the end of the session. So bookmark it for about 1:40 or so. We will get to some Q&A. And Lowell, go ahead and take it away. Introduce yourself. I'm going to put myself on mute and turn my video off, but I'm here as a resource for reference.
All right, cool. Thanks, Lily. And I've been sick all week, so my voice is a little jacked up too, but hopefully it's all right. Yep. So as Lillian said, I'm Lowell Ballard. Been with Timmons Group for over 20 years and do a lot of work with state, federal, local, a lot of wildfire, but all spatially sort of oriented. And happy to be presenting today. And then I'll let Craig and Keith and Kirk go.
Awesome. Thanks, Lowell. My name is Craig Weinshank. I'm a director of research at UL Research Institute's FSRI, or the Fire Safety Research Institute. I've been there almost 10 years now and currently the principal investigator for the development, deployment, and operations of NERIS.
Awesome. I'm Keith Smith. I'm Senior Director of Fire Technology for National Association of State Foresters. That's pretty much everything in the wildland fire world, non-federal. And happy to be here. We've had a lot of many years of this dream coming forward, and working with Craig and those that were at the meeting last week with Rebecca. They've been great partners, and looking forward to sharing with you today some of that interaction we've had with them.
And hello, everyone. My name is Kirk Davis. I'm a senior business analyst here at Timmons Group, but I mostly work in the data engineering and data product space, and I'm the owner for the GARP spatial data pipelines. If you know what GARP is, then I'm sure, warm shout out to everybody who's been involved in GARP and all of those projects. So we'll learn about what that is maybe a little bit later. Glad to be here.
Cool. Thanks, y'all. All right, so kind of a quick agenda a little bit. So I think it's always good to give a little background, like why would people spend time, money, effort? A lot of these things are, fed by your money and tax dollars and those things. So I think it's important to understand the optics behind why, both of our companies and organization and entities have invested in this stuff. A little of the mechanics, sort of how it happened, which I think are pretty fortuitous how things came together. And then ultimately, we don't want to collect data just to collect data. So I want to show a couple examples of sort of why it matters to people like the Forest Service, people who work in states, federal people who have systems and solutions out there, and why it matters. So this is a little bit of a tale of two systems, and we were rehearsing this stuff, I think, yesterday, and we were on the phone, and I said, NFPORS was a system. It had been around for a lot of years, not spatial, very tabular, a sort of like NFIRS, which is another sort of complementary, system out there. both of them related to fire reporting, grant reporting, what got done. Neither one of them very like good, but they were the best thing that there was around at the time. So it's not like we say that they were bad systems. They were just early. It was time for them to be sort of sunsetted. And I'm very happy that we, work together as companies and organizations with Forest Service and other people's support to get them aligned so we're not duplicating effort, and we were thoughtful about the way that these two systems sort of rose up out of the ashes. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about sunsetting NFPORS, what it looks like and why we headed down this fire response district boundary. And then Craig will talk a little bit about NFIRS, NFIRS. Everybody says it differently, but yeah, there's multiple applications. So those things are gone now. Both of them are sunsetted. So how did this journey begin for sort of our side of the story? So it deals with Association of State Foresters, which is basically every state forester in the country and all the territories and islands, USDA Forest Service, Timmins Group. So there's a whole lot of things that happened on that side of the house. And it really started with all of the state foresters got in a room several years ago when Jim Hubbard was running state and private forestry, and they basically said, we need better performance measures and metrics, and we need to tell more compelling stories about all this work that we do on the ground around doing prescribed burning and fuels treatments and landscapes, and how we're helping communities, and how we're jumping on little fires before they become really big fires, and protecting water and jobs and economics and all the things that happen in the wildfire space. So that was a very big project. It was a very hard thing because you have to get 50 states to consistently give us data. They have to report data. And a lot of times people would come up with these measures, but they wouldn't understand mechanically that we need data to help them be their own best advocates and tell, the most compelling stories for them. So all the state foresters got in a room with the U.S. Forest Service, and they voted on some of these measures and metrics. And one of them was around basically these volunteer fire assistance grants. They're called VFA dollars, and these monies are set aside and they're granted out to states, who are then granted out to local fire departments. And the reason that those monies are put out there is because they want these local fire departments who have wildland fire responsibilities, when they have a small fire that happens near them, to have the training, the PPE, the equipment, to be able to jump on a little fire before it becomes a super expensive fire and more catastrophic and all of those things. So on the right, you see South Dakota. On the left, you see Ohio. They're promoting these programs, and they do a lot of outreach and education around these things. So this is a simple little, tear sheet of what this performance measures metrics is. But if I'm the U.S. Forest Service and I'm giving money to the states, I want to make sure I know where that fire response district boundary is. And then I want to be able to look behind it and understand that there's a lot of wildfire risk, and it's not a place that has 0 red pixels, and that these people are actually worthy candidates, and we should be good stewards and give money in the right place. So this is just a little bit of the sort of performance measures, and it really just says, we know where these fire departments are, we know their response areas, we know they have responsibilities for wildfire, they actually have red pixels for hazard risk, and we want to fund them with money to help jump on little problems before they become big problems. So here you can see, Fire Department A, Fire Department B. We obviously need the stations, we need the boundaries more than the stations, but this is sort of the mechanics of the way that we went through storytelling. Here you can see Daryl Jones. You can see him handing out a fire department check, an award to a local fire department. And these are very good stories. And we go with Keith and I on tours. We go visit these local fire departments. These monies are extremely important for them to help them, support their mission. So the problem is, when I got in the room with 50 state foresters plus the islands, and I said, okay, who has like fire response district boundaries? Because that is a key piece of data that I need to tell this story in this measure that you have all voted as one of your top 6 is what they voted on. Everybody in the room's like, oh, we have it, or the fire marshal has it, or the 911 person has it, or somebody's got to have it. And so I literally had about 40 states go, we absolutely have the data. I went and started looking for the data, and I probably found it in about 8 or 10 places. So a lot of false positives in the data. So this is a little bit of what we would be gunning for. So here you can see, all of these fire response boundaries. We've stamped them, which ones have a lot of nasty red pixels for wildfire, medium, and light. And then here on the left is sort of, how we're allocating money. And we want to make sure, like if I'm O&B, I'm appropriations, and I'm looking at how we're deploying taxpayer dollars on the ground, that we're not doing random acts of capacity building, that we're very thoughtful. We know where the fires are happening. We know where there's wildfire risk, and the monies are going to the right place on the ground. So that's a little bit of our pitch. So I started digging around. Keith and I started talking. We go, well, we'll just go to NFIRS and we'll get all this awesome data because there's a reporting system. It's got all the fire departments, the fire station. And we found a couple things. One is we're not sure why this happened, but there's not supposed to be like duplicate FDIDs, which there were, and then there's not supposed to be missing ones. But we actually were granting money to people with no fire department ID, which was a little bit of a problem. The other thing is we thought we were going to be super smart and crafty, and I go, well, I'm just going to go into NFIRS and work with their people and figure out all the places that that fire department has responded to a fire, and I'm going to use that to make a proxy boundary for what their response area is. And it did not work. So I should have put up some crazier maps with all these overlaps and mutual aid, and it basically is a complete crazy spider web. So uh, so that did not work versus what the actual state would have. So the Forest Service, James Fortner, State and Private Forestry goes, well, how about if we kick in a little bit of funding and you start going and contacting the states and asking for data? So we would start calling 911, we'd call fire marshals, we would get a bunch of dead ends, and we go, geez, we're going to have to start calling every county in the country. And even when you start doing that, as Craig will attest to in a minute, you start getting a lot of janky drawings, and you can see the dotted lines. You can see where they've taken a fire response area and they've buffered it by like 5 miles because they thought that was a good idea because they do mutual aid and they cross the lines. But then all you do is end up with overlapping boundaries, and it just becomes extremely, extremely messy. But we did a big push. We got a first cut of data, but the second little thing on the top line there was we had one push of funding. We had no money to finish filling in these gaps. We had no money to sustain the data. We didn't really have a path forward. And so Craig will tell his side of the story here in a second of what their mission is, and then we'll talk about how they get aligned. So I'll come back to this in a minute, but NFPORS basically being sunsetted. NFPORS is where all that volunteer fire response, information, meaning who got money, but the goal was to replace NFPORS with this new system called GARP. Dumb name, but it sticks, so we like it. Keith gets, I think, blamed for that. I forget who gets blamed. I think Keith gets blamed for that. But everything in GARP is spatially anchored to the fire response district, the fuel treatments, all of those things, the communities. So it's a different system. All right, Craig.
Well, thanks, Lowell. And it's funny you bring up some of the boundary information. I mean, obviously that's one of the motivating factors why we're here. But some of the folks who send in boundaries, we do get the picture of a GIS boundary that's hanging on the wall in the fire station. Luckily, the URL is somewhat readable in the picture, and we go to the true source and pull the geospatial data. We also get some maybe overzealous response of, well, I protect all this area. And I'm like, well, is that what you have authority to protect, or is that where you protect for mutual aid?
Right.
And so those lines get a little blurry as well. So it is a massive undertaking, and I'll highlight kind of how all of this fits in and how this partnership works. But I wanted to start a little bit about what is NERIS for folks who are unaware.
And real quick, how quickly are those slides showing up?
You're good. Yeah, it was spot on.
Okay. Cool.
So the NERIS project started a couple years ago, and it's designed to replace NFIRS, which sunset for all incident reporting on 1/1/26. So NFIRS no longer can accept records with calendar year 2026 attached. And it fully sunsets for data updating and retrieval by the end of the calendar month. And so NERIS, which is its replacement, is designed to do a handful of things differently. One of them is to be timely. So in the legacy system, there's a lot of manual workflows, exporting plain text files, zipping them up, sending them via email, either to your state and or to USFA, then getting an exchange file back with some errors that you had to triage. So removing that barrier and building an API so that submission is timely when you close that record, whether that's in direct entry or through a third-party vendor. It can be automatically sent and processed immediately. Everything is geospatial, so lat long is now part of the record, either coming from the source or geocoded upon entry. And then also we recognized early on, one of the challenges with NFIRS, it was a little bit of a black box, is that you'd submit a record and then you'd often ask, why am I submitting this? Basically, you submitted it to be grant eligible. But we wanted to do more. And so providing analytics tools back, the insights we can gather not only at the local level because of the 30,000 fire departments we work with, but also starting to leverage in aggregate data so you can see your cells relative to departments in your state and into national metrics. So that's a big piece of the puzzle is we know incident. No, I've yet to meet the firefighter that signed up for the fire service because they wanted to enter data. If that person exists, please raise your hand. I'd love to meet you in person. But for everyone else, right, data entry is a chore. And so we recognize that every minute you're spending doing data entry is time not doing something else. So we better provide value for that time. So that's one of our core missions. If we go to the next slide, a little bit about our motivation. And, I get asked this all the time. Why would you take this project on? With all the moving pieces, right? Replacing a legacy system, spinning up a new system, transitioning the country. And it goes back to this kind of quote. I originally heard it on the sitcom Parks and Recreation, which is just, I think, fitting for the topic of this talk anyway. But it's working hard at work worth doing. And there is no better group of folks to support and to work with every day than the fire service. And so that's what is at our core here at FSRI and USFA, obviously. And everyone else on this call as well, right, is that it's a pleasure and a joy to get to work with the fire service and support them any way we can. And so that's what keeps us going every day, despite the challenges of making a transition happen at the national level. There's always going to be folks that the question that they really liked is no longer in the same form, all those kind of things. And part of that is to continue to work to make sure we are meeting that mission, meeting that mark. But this is kind of what keeps us going every single day. If you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about kind of how we went around building this. And so one of the challenges of rolling something like this out is that there's only so much that we can share publicly at any given time, because that's what you get to see and touch. It's the front end or the user interface of the site. It's neris.fsri.org. You can see all the different videos and resources and all that stuff. But kind of underneath the waterline, that's where kind of all of the kind of big lifting happened for the last couple of years. And so it really started with our system architecture. So we had to rethink, how are we going to build this? If we're going to take in data in kind of a real-time fashion, right, we have to have resources that can scale. And so we built this on an elastic cloud infrastructure. We use a system called Kubernetes to allow us to scale horizontally as load increases. We have a sophisticated queuing system so that when bulk uploads or API hits happen, we're not hindering the rest of the site performance. All of that is pretty well flushed out at this point. Right now, we see somewhere around 50 to 60 incidents submitted per minute. That's around 70,000 per day. We anticipate that number to really double when we have everyone reporting. And so how do we handle all the reporting? That's all done through our API. And so that basically is the recipe for what the data structure needs to be, both from an ingest side, so submission, and also from a outgoing side. So all the data can be pulled out of the API in any different number of connections and partnerships, right? Both at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. And all of that API is driven on our data schemas, right? So that is what sets the structure of our API, the questions that are required, the nested logic, all the choices that you enter is in our data schemas. And then lastly, again, it's that analytics piece, which soon will be surfacing a little bit higher above that waterline, right, as we start to roll out more pieces of the analytics puzzle publicly, and then also sharing more with the local departments behind their authentication into the site. So fundamentally, what we are after, it's collect data, and it's collected from either the direct entry application inside of NERIS or through a connection with your CAD or RMS. So no longer, even if you're using a third-party system, do you have to run exports of plain text files, zip them up, and send them around. We designed the system to talk system to system. So each of your RMS vendors all have an integration to the NERIS application itself via the API, which allows us to send and receive data, basically creating that handshake between your RMS and the system. And then there's the piece of, well, once it arrives, right, we want to start layering in some additional sources. For example, why should a firefighter have to enter the weather every single time they're on a call when what they're going to do is look up weather.com or some other weather site, Weather Underground or any other of those providers, grab that data and enter it into the record? Well, we can do that automatically. There's APIs that pull all of the weather data. We know the lat long of your call. We know the nearest weather station. We know the timestamps, and we pull all of that data automatically for you. We can layer in all your census data. We can layer in all of your parcel data from different sources of parcel information. We geocode everything so that you can intersect with other data sources as well. And then the API and the database allows us to manage all of this. So we have a secure cloud-hosted system. That API is a secure encrypted transmission between your RMS and ours. You're no longer emailing plain text files with PII in them. In fact, if you try to submit PII into the system, we will scrub it. We want to maintain a high fidelity data set independent of PII, right? The value add of that is not there at the aggregate level, right? But that's why a lot of folks use third-party systems to collect that information and keep it locally. And then also part of the management is all of the training resources, documentation, and those are all continuing to roll out on the site. And then it gets into the analyze side, right? What are we doing? It's how are we even telling the story with the enrichment? It's the analytics and dashboards. Then finally sharing it out. It's making sure your state fire marshals have the data instantaneously as well, so that, again, you no longer have to worry about moving that file around. Same thing with USFA, and then our state partners like NASF. And the other piece is, well, how do you do something like this? Well, part of it is to be open. On the left-hand side is our API. You can look at our API docs there. That's all the endpoints, all of the components that make up any of our endpoints, from defining what a entity is in the system to defining an incident, all of the puts and patch and post methods. Everything is there and open and transparent. We also have a GitHub where we have a lot of our documentation as well. So it's while we're not open source because there's security pieces around some of the source code, we are open architecture in the sense of we're sharing everything we can publicly in as many open formats as we can. And so just a little bit on the timeline piece. So we started the work in May of 2023 is when the contract started. We had our initial framework out for national engagement starting at the end of 2023. It wrapped into January of 24. We had over 1,600 comments on the schemas. The running thing about this is never read the comments. Well, we had to, which was both beneficial to the project. The fire service made their participation made this better. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Will it ever be perfect? Probably not. But our goal is to continue working with an open framework so that we can continue to improve the system. The other piece is we had a prototype with 6 departments by March of 2024. So 9 months after we had the contract, we began testing with 6 departments, from large career to small combination departments. We added another 50 in August, and then went live in November of 2024, a little over a year and a half after the project started. If we go to the next slide, we started taking records in January of 2025. So we've been collecting records now in the system for about a full calendar year. Our first submission came from Pierre, rural South Dakota. And since then, we had our first major metropolitan department coming in April. through a API connection. So using a third-party vendor to securely send data through the API started happening in April, and then that department has just continued to send records seamlessly ever since. So that part has been, a really huge piece. And then the last piece in December of 2025, we had our millionth record submitted. Now that's small potatoes in this big scale of things. There's about 32 to 36 million calls for service every year. But the really exciting part was both by the end of the year, about 90% of all fire departments had an invite into their inbox. And of those million records, our median time from call create, so when the call was opened in dispatch to arrival in NERIS, was about 13 hours. So we cut down a lag that had been months, if not weeks, or weeks and months to hours. Typically on the order of a shift or two is when records show up. So that's a huge shift in terms of the timeline in the system. And so the other piece is, well, how do we continue to push forward? And there's a big initiative here, and this goes into all of those boundaries. This is part of onboarding into the system, right? Is one, we've got 30,000 fire departments in the system. As they log in, it's what is your boundary? What are your stations? What are your units? And that's inherent into the system itself. So it allowed us to build on what that foundation laid forth by the Timmins Group and the National Association of State Foresters, right? They were a big part of seeding this database in terms of us working as a partnership to say, hey, we've got these boundaries. Well, we've got a system where these boundaries are going to be touched by the local departments every single day when they submit records. How do we maintain this? And so that's part of the NERIS mission, is to continue to maintain this, to support it, to tie in all of the stations as they are added and removed based on, departments growing or getting new stations. All of this is available publicly. We update this every day at midnight UTC. That QR code will take you to the public feature service. And if we go to the next slide, a little snapshot of what it looks like is, there's all of the station locations and headquarters locations and demographics about the departments. And again, none of this happens while we've been, working with all the locals to help and update boundaries and clean up things, both from, working with PSAPs and counties and states and locals. None of this happens, right, without the work laid down over the previous several years, right, by Keith and his team and Lowell and his team, right. This is really where it's been so exciting to work together, right, for a common goal. And now with just the directive of the NERIS project, right, is that we can then enhance and maintain, right, and provide a service that all parts of the fire service can benefit from. So again, thank you folks for the collaboration. That's one of the more exciting pieces of a project of this scale is when good folks get to work together.
Yeah, I would agree. And that was one of the reasons we were motivated to do this, because it is like a Herculean effort. And like I said, we had some seed funding to get this idea going, and you had funding, and we didn't have money to sustain it. And it's crazy for two people to be working on something this big and important, and you're much better positioned to talk to the locals, and it just feels like good karma that it kind of our worlds collided and aligned. So we got a couple other little sections to cover with folks. One of them is I never really get excited about aggregating a bunch of data just for aggregating data's sake. Like, we need to make sure we're solving like really good business problems with it. So I want to show a couple examples of how this project and the unification of the boundaries and then enriching the data and using it can help solve some real business problems that folks have. So again, how do we apply it to do better things on the ground? So I have just a couple examples in here. Some of them relate to GARP, and some of them relate to actually like more local sort of all hazard, wildfire planning, et cetera. But and when we close this out, I'll have Keith speak a little bit to some of the things we heard from like OMB and appropriations and other people about this project too. So sort of important. So as I mentioned before, NFPORS was the old wildfire reporting system that all the states use. Interior had data in there. USDA Forest Service had data in there. It's really around implementing the cohesive strategy, which talks about response, it talks about, communities, it talks about landscapes, all of those things. But if you were to look at the funding that went out through this VFA program, most of the states who were delivering it and the Forest Service, they never knew where all these boundaries were on the ground, and they didn't know where these boundaries were in context with, where there's actually wildfire risk on the ground, where there's a lot of wildfire occurrences, et cetera. So it was really hard for them to be great stewards of the funding. And it was impossible for us to do things like in Washington and Oregon and Forest Service regions. Well, it used to be Region 6. I don't know what it is now, but it was impossible for us to do things like, how many people ask for funding, and where is our unmet demand, and how many could we not supply? So it impeded us from doing things with NFPORS, like, I don't know if lobbying is the right word, but advocating that there's a lot of people who are out here requesting these funds to solve this really big wildfire problem. We don't have enough money to go around, and there's a lot of high risk communities who could use this kind of support. So in this little example that we have on like garphub.org, I mean, you can go in here and look at any given state. So this is Texas, and at the bottom we can say, well, how many nasty red pixels do you have related to wildfire? Or how many rural communities, or how many like wildfire records do you have in terms of occurrence records? So using not only the boundaries, but also the, incident and the calls and the response, data points, we're able to do a lot of really crafty things with the data, sort of like Craig alluded to with the analytics that are coming out of NERIS. It's like a flywheel. Once you get a little bit of good data coming together, I mean, it's so synergistic, it's crazy. It's like just get a few of the building blocks together and then, the world is your oyster. So if I'm like somebody who's in a state and I'm looking at who should get VFA money and where I need to build capacity, one of the other things we were never able to do, which NERIS is going to bring along, is, not only where is the response boundary and how does it relate to wildfire, but what is the capacity of that, particular organization? I mean, do they have a lot of people? Are they, under capacity? Do they have a really big problem and not a lot of funding? Those are all the sorts of things that help us be better stewards of your tax dollars and people living with wildfire and who need good response, to make sure that we're not doing random acts of capacity building and just, help us be better stewards of the money. The last little example before Kirk does his thing and then we close it out is, so we've been working on another project called this Living CWPP. So if you come from like non-wildfire, you're probably used to like all hazard plans and hazard mitigation plans. And those are sort of like hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, landslides, all those sorts of things. Really in the FEMA sort of swim lane. If you're in the wildfire space, people have like community wildfire protection plans. So we've been working on this project called a Living CWPP, where, and we have a lot of partners that we're working with, individual states and other people working on this. But the typical planning exercise, which is not a bad thing, it would happen with static maps and sticky pins, and you would roll this up and you would try to come up with priorities, and you would try to look at this map on the ground and make sense of what's happening. And you would ultimately end up at the end of the day with this plan, and people felt really good, and you would have a PDF and you'd have all these signatures, and in many cases it would sit on the shelf. Sometimes it became actionable and you had the real projects, and the adoption had a really wide range of whether it was implemented or not. So we've been working to try to sort of mature the way people do those plans. And so if you look at this example from Washington State, the way that we're hoping to use this is, if I'm a planner and I'm building a CWPP around this particular county, which is Skagit, right, Kurt? Keith? Yes, Skagit. What I want to do is make sure that I'm taking Craig's data from NERIS and I'm overlaying. So this person in here who's building a plan and they're looking at where the wildfires are and where the communities at risk are, and slope and elevation and wildfire hazard and risk and, population and underserved this and that. I need to make sure that they have all of those boundaries to know that there's 10 fire departments and these people aren't at capacity and they've had a lot of occurrences in wildfire. That's going to make them so much more prepared, in addition to knowing like what is the capacity of each one of these fire stations. It's really going to help them understand how quickly, if there's a problem here, can these people jump on it and help out. And this is a core piece of planning data that we really want to, again, gathering data is really cool. Like we're all data junkies. We love it, but we need to make sure that we're like doing something with it and solving good problems, which is kind of what those two examples are. Sorry, I talked
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
No worries.
No problem.
Yeah, and so in this last section, I just wanted to touch on like a real example, right? So not a real example, but how we actually end up using NERIS to support GARP, to support that fire district spatial data now. And so I thought it would be great to recap kind of where all of these projects kind of came from, all the different organizations involved in either funding, implementing, and then what the output results are. So NERIS, both NERIS and GARP need the same spatial data to function correctly, to provide analytics, to provide insights back to its users. And so that is where, for us, even though our money is coming from different places, we're kind of coming together and able to integrate both of those systems. And if you go ahead and click, I've got a really fun graphic. There we go. There's the fire truck moving across. So that's the integration between, and that's where it stops. No, so on this next slide, this is sort of a cans and boxes description. But I think for the more technical minded folks, or even those who think in systems, like this is how we take the data from NERIS and integrate it within GARP. So because we're not necessarily like funding within GARP, we try to allocate it in very specific ways. Very, like we want to target it at what matters most. And so we rely on the performance reporting agencies. So those agencies that are saying what they accomplish with their grants, when they notice missing fire district data or data that's incorrect, it triggers us to refresh the data that we have and use that integration with NERIS to make sure they get everything up to date, so that they can report using those new records. So we get a support request within GARP that will say, "Hey, I'm missing this fire department." It could just be one, and even though it's just one district that maybe has a weird name, or they're like, "Oh, this is the wrong county," whatever, two districts merge and become one. We make sure that we reach out to NERIS and run our process to refresh everything for that state. And we maintain the integrity of past performance reports while we do it. So as part of this refresh process, we use the API keys that NERIS provides to us to download all of the data for that one given state. We take it and we break out the pieces that are tabular and spatial so that we can manage them separately. Really important is the NERIS ID that is maintained within NERIS. It's unique for every single record and it's automatically created. So we know it will be unique and we can use it to sort of leverage new records that come in or records that maybe we need to remove or visit. So in NERIS, we have the NERIS ID, and in GARP, we have the FDRB ID, which is a unique identifying text value. So we take the spatial data sets, we geo-enrich those. You saw the example that Lowell showed for Texas with wildfire risk, wildfire counts, and target population counts. These are all things that are important for the reporting agency to know that their money's going to the right place. And then we take those geo-enriched boundaries and we upsert them into the FDRB GIS service, which is a part of the GARP ecosystem. It's that spatial data pipeline. And then if there's any records that are missing from NERIS or things that need corrected, and oftentimes I guess it doesn't happen that often when we're pulling from NERIS because their stuff is constantly improving as we move along. But if it is, or if we need any changes, NERIS has a really nice support system that we're able to lob over either JSON data or data sets, spatial records, tabular changes, and provide those directly to them. They ensure that they're corrected, and the next time we refresh, intentionally, we will be pulling those changes back in, and the cycle just repeats. And so that is how we integrate our GARP data with NERIS. And in the future, I can envision this process becoming something that is more real time. But for the time being, like this works really nice. And so the output from this, it's important to note that within GARP, we're not using all of the NERIS data quite yet. So we're in the early stages of GARP and integrating this NERIS data with reporting. And so currently there's only a quarter of states left. So it's 13 states are still using the NASF data. So that's data that the NASF has requested in the past and maybe has slightly higher spatial integrity or maybe is more new. And NERIS, as they work their way across the entire nation, is engaging with these states. They're getting better and better data each day. And so bit by bit, we will convert each state over to the NERIS spatial data records and those NERIS IDs. And so, yeah, that's split out right now. So we just have a quarter of the states left that are on FDRB records. And just a quick little stat nationwide, of the records that we have, 88% of all fire districts have spatial data. So that's a really good metric and tells you kind of where things are going. We are slowly approaching sort of that like perfect data scenario where every boundary or every fire department has a spatial boundary. And yeah, it's a great place to be. And I get really jazzed about collecting clean data, even though Lowell gets excited about analytics. So
I like it all. Yeah, we all love data.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So yeah, that was about the mark we wanted to hit, 45 minutes ish. Again, it's a little bit of technology stuff for people into that, and then a little bit of real world business stuff for other people. And I don't know if we had any questions coming in, Lillian or Keith. And Keith, I know you had a couple of things.
So I see, and no, Lillian will do it, but I see my old friend Kim Zagaris on the call. And you can't chat with me live, but hi, it's been a while. And so contact information right there on the screen for you, partner. And you can just do that. And then I'll let Craig answer that first question.
There we go. The first question from Kim, how will NERIS track mutual aid responses locally, regionally, statewide, nationally, et cetera, from the small incident to like 2025 Los Angeles fires?
That's a great question. We put a lot of effort into how we handle aid, and it's kind of a two, maybe even a three-part piece. So one of them is we're working with all the locals to define their static aid agreements. And so that's going to be something we'll be working across 26 with, is documenting all of the kind of automatic and or mutual aid agreements that are currently in place. So building a department-to-department relationship table behind the scenes. In parallel to that, every call that you're responding to, you can tag your agencies that you are either giving aid to or receiving aid from. And so there's a directionality to aid, and then there's the operational side of aid, which is one of three types. There is aid in support of, so you're the second in engine responding to your neighboring jurisdiction. That's aid in support of. You tag their NERIS ID that you provided aid. On their record, they say, hey, you provided aid to us. That's the ideal world where both sides agree. Then there's aid in lieu of. You responded to your neighboring jurisdiction. They were busy. They weren't able to respond. You handled the entire record yourself. You tag them, and you complete your record. Then there's acting as, which is kind of the CAL FIRE model, where there might be a jurisdiction when you're responding on state land, you're actually operating as CAL FIRE versus your current jurisdiction. And you can tag and say you're operating as.
All those contract counties, yeah, makes sense.
I think we lost Craig for a second.
The really cool
there he is.
Part is when you're tagging as aid, we can then link those with the record. Oh, am I back?
You are. Really,
yeah.
You were asleep for a second, then really fast.
Your internet connection is unstable warning.
Oh no. No worries. Well,
so
thanks for answering that question wonderfully. Yeah.
I'll type it in.
Awesome.
Yeah,
but the other piece of aid is also on jurisdictional boundary.
All right. Fantastic. Thanks so much, Craig. Let us head over to the next question we've got from David Salino. For states already reporting through Inform, which is Massachusetts, and have solid, accurate data, how will this change our management of wildfire reporting? I'm not sure who that one's directed at, but I think that we can probably answer it for David.
I can answer it.
Keith, yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Dave. Saw you last week.
Polino.
So, our feeling at NASF and at the ER1 level is we don't care which vehicle you use to get your fire occurrence data into there. We just want it in there. And so using Inform, using NERIS, using CAD system like Wildcat, any of those, it creates a record in Inform. That's the goal. Irwin in itself has a robust duplicate processing. So we know it's a given. We're going to have duplicate records reported. It's absolutely going to happen. And so we'll get records coming in from nearest. We'll have those exact same or smells and feels like the same incident coming in from other sources. And it'll go through that duplication process. And you'll just have to resolve those, or those will be resolved in Inspector, which is the tool that's the online tool. It's the mothership of all fire occurrence records. And that's where those will be done. Hopefully that answers that question for you.
But yeah, Dave, I've got a couple people I'm working with and like there's so I think I might pull you in because I need to do a little deeper dive to make sure we know how like all those occurrence records are happening because I got a couple other lingering questions related to that. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up.
Awesome. Thanks,
So
Keith,
then,
and thanks, Dave, for the great question.
and I can kind of answer the next one and then pass it over to Craig. I know that, and Dave Salino can answer this. Yes, you can absolutely have a login to that. Dave Salino from Massachusetts has one. You can chat with him, Aaron, offline to get his insight onto how that works. And Craig, any nuts and bolts about that?
Yeah, we just want to coordinate with the respective state fire marshals as well, so that everyone's kind of in sync. Is just kind of our piece. We just brought on Vermont this morning, and we're building a lot of back-end tooling in the database to build custom infrastructure for all the state offices, both at the kind of state fire marshal level and also at the wildland level as well. So there'll be some custom tooling coming over the next quarter that will really kind of be purpose driven for a lot of this stuff.
I got to look a little bit under the hood, what's proposed for the analytics stuff that you've got coming in. And because of that, I would encourage those state wildland fire forestry agencies to get a user ID to be able to use those analytics. It's very enlightening, is what's coming.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And let's see, we've got another one here. I think that this one's for Lowell. In what ways is Timmons Group looking to use the nearest data moving forward?
So, we get called in by people like Salino from Massachusetts and a lot of these other wildfire organizations, state, local, NGO people. And, sort of that CWPP example, it's not something that would like maybe pop into your mind initially, but every time somebody's working on one of these community wildfire protection plans, actually, I think it's by statute or law or whatever that they actually have to pull in like the local, fire people, they have to pull in the Forest Service, they have to pull in the state people. So, but it's always an exercise where they have to do all these data grabs and they have to go and see who has the boundaries and who doesn't. And they have to ask them all these questions about, it's all the stuff that Craig is already going to know in nearest because they've been onboarded and they've got their boundaries in there. They have their capacity. We have incident records, occurrence records in there. So, my goal is to basically save time and money by not having people duplicate effort. And if we can use those boundaries to make better decisions on how we spend money, grant dollars that the Forest Service doesn't have enough of to deliver down to people like Solino in Massachusetts and other places, to defend our programs. Um, we're constantly building these, and because Craig and his crew built it with APIs and ways for us to interact with it that aren't all janky and old and busted, then it becomes a lot better. Um, the other thing, like before we pop off real quick, is Keith, I do think like this administration and like the things that you and I have heard in the room with OMB about alignment and non-duplication, you probably ought to like drop a comment about like the stuff we've heard from like the uppities.
The uppities. Yeah, let's chat about that. So we've actually met with appropriations and OMB, both for Interior and for Department of Agriculture for Forest Service, a few times over the last few years, and shared with them, all of our progress and things that are going. They want to hear, is their money being spent well, especially appropriations. And we met. Oh, I don't know. It's been within the year with OMB, the two examiners from Forest
Like
Service
three
and
months ago.
Interior. Yeah, and shared with them kind of all the things we're doing, but wanted to highlight some of the things with GARP and just some initial comments with them. I'll just highlight those. They were blown away with their quote unquote conversation. Um, they said they've never seen a data-driven solution in line with exactly what this administration's looking for. So we saw several things like that we were able to answer questions that they've never had before, answers to, and so that was a big plus. And so we're really pleased with that, and they spread the word around, and we got several inquiries. We met with Department of Agriculture's upper level people. Some of those have taken the out. They've retired since then, but that was just here just a couple months ago. And then we've also Interior and the new with Brian coming on as the new director of U.S. Wildland Fire Service. And so, we're well in tune with them, and they are very excited about the data that we can provide. This is insight to data that they've never had and anxious for it. So we'll continue that path and continue meeting with them and briefing them. And it's at their request oftentimes. We've got an appropriation call coming up here pretty quick.
Cool. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, let's see. I think we've got time for maybe one more question. I'm going to hit Keith with this one. What is NASF doing to integrate NERIS into national opportunities?
So just as I mentioned, as we use the nearest data. So I've been in my current career for 22 years, and I did wildland fire for 20 before that with Washington State. And when you look at the pie chart of where all fire occurrence records and data comes from, I call it bacon, but that's beside the point. And there's a lot of smiles on the call. You know what bacon is.
Data's
But
in bacon.
data is the new bacon. Yeah. I've got the new. Yeah. There
Nice.
we go.
Yeah, that's the old school version too.
It
Yeah.
is. So, I lost my thought. I got tied up on bacon there for a minute. But all that for us, for NASF, we're always on the path of looking at how can we tell a consistent story. And you've got 57 different states and territories around the country that all have a different set of books. And so we have to try to normalize that information and be able to share it. This is one of those efforts. And nearest, I've had a dream for 22 years and working with them, and it's been banging my head against the wall for most of those 22 years. Dr. Lori helped out getting the wheels greased and getting things moving. And then Rebecca, who most of you met last week, or some of you, and Craig have been a breath of fresh air. And we see a light at the end of the tunnel. This is huge. When we talk to people, they're like, this should have happened decades ago,
Yeah.
this data exchange. And so this is a huge, huge plus for us.
Versus multiple people nagging the same people for the same piece of data over and over again, which they absolutely love.
So, for example, a workflow. And you saw Dave Salino talk about, well, they use Inform. Inform is the fire occurrence application, wildland fire application that's used by Interior, Forest Service, and quite a few state agencies and a few local governments. And it's a great tool, and I would encourage its use if we can. So Don Koppel, who asked a question a minute ago, he's actually the West business lead for Inform, and so he has an insight to that, and we use that quite a bit. But you've got local governments who have not reported. We've had to bulk upload those into Inspector, into the Inform platform, and which introduces questionable data at times. And so we want to get away from that as much as we can. And so that's the next phases of the NERIS project, working with them, is uploading that data directly from NERIS. You don't have to do bulk uploads anymore. There's some that fire departments, they don't even have a smartphone or a computer. You're still going to have to do some work there. But we think it will dramatically decrease the bulk upload need moving into the future. That's a huge win. That makes me sleep well at night.
Mhm.
I think the whole thing should make you sleep well, Keith, Craig,
My dreams
Lowell,
are coming
and
true.
Kurt. Yeah, absolutely. And to the point of we know it how big of a project it is. Again, it was listed by Pop Science as a top 50 innovation of 2025.
Yep.
Pretty
50
cool.
innovations throughout the entire world. NERIS was up there. So there's a reason why it makes you sleep well at night. It's because it's an actual solution that you've waited a very long time to achieve, and it has an incredibly large impact. So congratulations to you, Keith and Craig, Lowell and Kirk. Thank you guys so much for creating the platform for NERIS to succeed, after GARP. So this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you everyone for joining us. We had several dozen folks on the call, upwards of 80 folks here today with us. So we really appreciate the opportunity to share this project story. Thank you for your Q&A questions. And if you want to reach out to these guys, we did throw their emails up on the last screen there, but we will send a post webinar email as well, just to touch base, say hi, and we'll be sure to include their contact information there as well.